You will hire somebody for neurodiversity for the same reason why women started showing up at workplaces hundreds of years ago. Yeah, because it's the thing to do. Inclusivity means hiring everybody.
Right.
And just like you made the toilets accessible for women, you're going to make your workplace accessible for people with a diagnosis. It's as simple as that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Leisurely Baatein. My guest today is Mrs. Shaloo Sharma, Founder, Director and Chief Service Provider for Evoluer. Shaloo, welcome to Leisurely Baatein. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm doing very well.
Great. Shaloo, to start with, if you could share with us a bit about Evoluer and the wonderful work that you and your team are doing there.
So, Evoluer essentially is derived from the word evolve, and it really means to become a better version of what we already are. Right. So keeping that in mind, what Evoluer Solutions essentially does is that we work in the field of neurodiversity, and we work primarily to empower people to be ready for mainstream employment.
Fantastic.
Or entrepreneurship, or to live an independent, productive life. Having said that, our focus is on students who are more towards how do I put it? Students who are more ready for employability, if I can use that word, or who have the potential for employability.
Sure.
And our strength is not in being with young people whose needs are a little higher. So we've tried to keep a very niche group of young people with us, and so that we are able to deliver what we promise to deliver.
Sure.
So having said that, the team works on imparting young people psychological skills, self-management skills, self-help skills, and the work skills more than anything else, so that they are able to seamlessly integrate themselves into open workspaces which are equipped to be with young people whose needs are a little different than the so-called neurotypical society.
Phenomenal. And are there like vocational trainings, and how do you train the young adults you work with?
So when you say vocational training, our program is a little different from vocational training.
Sure.
We are looking at employability skills training, which is it's an umbrella term that focuses mostly on those skills which are applicable to any job.
Right.
So I'll give an example. If you just segregate the skills into hard skills and soft skills.
Right.
So vocational centers target more on the hard skills, and we target mostly. Our focus is on the soft skills, which are going to be applicable no matter what hard skills you end up doing.
Sure.
So as opposed to, say, doing packaging,
right?
Like we are training to be a packer, and you can label and tag and stack. Right. Yes, we are going to do that as well, but we are also going to teach you the skills that will allow you to sustain that vocational skill that you have attained.
Absolutely. Very, very important.
Yeah.
100%.
So, that's what we focus on.
Right. And Shaloo, how did you decide to start Evoluer? What was the inspiration? How did the whole genesis come by?
So I've been working in the field for over 26 years now. And of course, I went down the tried and tested path of, working with younger children, working purely with the therapeutic setup, doing special ed. My core training is in two areas. Years ago, I've done my post-graduation both in psychology and in fine arts. So the most logical thing to do was to just go down the way of expressive art therapy. So that's what I did for emotional betterment and mental well-being and so on and so forth. But then I went on to head a school for 10 years in Gurgaon. And that was the place where a lot of my learning happened. And after 10 years of being in that space, I realized that I had graduated to being more of an admin person and troubleshooting and managing the staff rather than, staying where my passion was.
Right.
So on my 10th work anniversary, I said, I think it's time. If I don't do it now, I'll probably retire here. So then I very consciously made the decision to stay focused on the young adults and the adult group, stay focused on employability, not do hardcore therapy like speech language therapy or occupational therapy, physiotherapy, phonics and all that, but focus on that section of students who I feel are the ones that have the biggest danger of falling through the cracks. So there is a school program, and then there's a college program, and then there's a middle which is lost.
Right.
So automatically neurotypical students will go from school to college. They'll just make the transition smoothly. But unfortunately, especially in India, we don't have a gap year or a transition program. So I think you can relate to it more if you keep the gap year program in mind.
Right.
And that we are like the gap year program or the transition program. We'll get you work ready for any work.
Right.
And then within that, of course, we have specific training that goes on.
Sure. And I'm sure, when you started this, there would have been challenges. So what kind of challenges, that you came across, and, how did you take Evoluer, stages to the point where it is, now with so many people. And I did visit your center a year and a half back, and I was so, excited and, inspired to be there, seeing the good work you do.
I think my biggest challenge was working with parents and trying to convince them the necessity of a program such as this, that they needed to shift their focus away from, let me teach my son or daughter, say, data entry. And I said, let us first teach them or empower them so that they understand the need to work.
Right.
I also kept one thing in mind, which is essential to our program, that for any success, after a certain point, it's not what those hard skills of work are, it is your people skills.
Right.
It is your readiness for change. Right. It is your understanding the hierarchy. Right. It is your communication skills. It is your dedication, your focus, and the knowledge that what I'm doing is productive. I'm contributing. And a lot of time with people with neurodiversity, we assume that we don't need to teach the little nuances of what makes you a successful person.
Right.
Our shift, the minute we shifted our vocabulary from vocational training to life skills, to work skills, to employability skills, we've also grown in our terminology. I think then the parents were on board.
Right. The
minute we started saying we are going to help these young people with a career and not just a job.
Right.
I think that just made the subtle shift in the sensibilities of the parents as well. That it's not about getting a job. Getting a job is not difficult. There are a lot of organizations who will come forth and give you a job. But can we look at a career growth?
Absolutely.
Can we look at the happiness factor within the job? Are we thinking about what is it that this young person really wants to do?
Right.
Are we looking at all the paraphernalia that comes along with the work? This is my friend. This is someplace where I'll have to go for the rest of my life. A lot of good things and bad things are going to be thrown at me. Am I equipped? Am I equipped for all that is going to come hurling at me when I get a job? So that is what we started focusing on. So the biggest challenge was, of course, getting the parents on board. And the biggest challenge was simplifying things to do away with what is not needed and to do away with a therapeutic or a special education mindset. So that was the biggest challenge, I feel, for me and for my team as such.
Right. It's phenomenal because, that's a very unique, part that Evoluer brings towards neurodiversity. And leading into that, I know that, you and your team work with various corporates, very large corporates in all different segments. What has been your view, from over the years, in terms of corporates adapting to neurodiversity? I mean, there are a lot of large corporates like Microsoft and others who are putting in a lot of effort, both from a technology perspective, both from a employability perspective. But my question is more from the work environment that awaits, and that creates that neurodiversity.
So, yes, we work with a lot of corporates, and lately in the past 1.5 years since the lockdown, things have only gotten better. I think people have a lot of time to reflect on what everybody's doing right and everybody needs to do more of. I think the first step is having the intent for any corporate that, yes, I do have the intent to make our place inclusive. Inclusive is a very large term.
Right.
Then the next step is to understand that neurodiversity does not end at just the physical diagnosis that a person may have.
Right.
It's very easy to bunch young people that you're wanting to hire in physical diagnosis. Here is somebody who is vision impaired or blind or cannot see, I need brain. Here is somebody who cannot hear or is a deaf person, so I need sign language. Here is somebody who's a wheelchair user, so I just need to make the physical space more accessibility. When it comes to the space of intellectual disability or autism or somebody with a psychological diagnosis, it's a very vague term. So the first thing that the corporates need to be ready for, and organizations like Microsoft and SAP Labs and Morgan Stanley and so many other organizations now, the first thing that they were ready for was the readiness to demystify for themselves what it means. That you will not be able to club all the people with intellectual disability in one box, right? So that was the first step. I think it's only now that organizations that are global, that have been handling neurodiversity in other countries, they have done a phenomenal job of just putting a system and a process to it that their counterparts in India are taking a cue from them as well.
Sure.
So that is what a lot of organizations are doing. I think they are also being very sensible in hiring consultants. Like I'm a consultant for Microsoft now. So
Sure.
They hire people who already know it, and then comes the marrying of the two things.
Right.
So that's where the biggest shift has happened. That, hey, we want to do this, but we don't know how.
Right.
So, and even for somebody like me, that after a certain point, I don't know what are the real skills I need to teach, the hard skills I need to teach my young people. So I tell them that I'm going to train them to be on time. I'm going to train them how to show up at a Teams meet. I'm going to show them how to understand the vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Of the workplace. I'm going to make sure that they take feedback positively, negative as well as positive feedback. I'm going to teach them how to ask questions and meet deadlines and not compromise on quality. Those are the things I'm going to teach them. But the other skills, like if you want me to teach them coding, aligned to what Microsoft does, I will not be able to. Right. I can teach them the nuances of coding. Right. So being very clear about what I can do and leaving the rest to the organization, otherwise they'll have to wipe the slate clean and re-begin again. We've been working very closely with Lemon Tree also. A lot of the young people from Evoluer has gone on to do internship and get employed. Even with Lemon Tree, they were very clear that please unko housekeeping ka kaam mat sikhaiye. That we will teach. But teach them what it means to be working in a team. Teach them how to be in a space that will have so much of input for them that may distress them. Teach them language. Give them the vocabulary to communicate with us when they are getting distressed. Little things like saying, I'm tired, I need a break.
Wow,
teach
phenomenal. So important.
To say that so that we understand what they are saying. It's so important, and I have learned all this, Subhadip, after working with organizations like Lemon Tree. Like we had one young student who used to have a meltdown at 11. This was with the Big Bazaar. We did a pilot program with SCPWD with Big Bazaar, and one of our young people used to have a meltdown at about 12 while just weeping uncontrollably. So I asked this young lady what's going on. She says, I'm exhausted, my feet hurt. So, but I don't know what to do. I said, did you tell anybody? She says, no. So I realized I haven't told her to convey to her buddy much before she is at a breaking point that I need to sit for 5 minutes. So when we got that fixed, that at about 10:30, 11, when you've been working for 2 hours, tell your buddy or your supervisor, I am tired, can I please sit for 10 minutes? And that took care of the problem. So these little things we have learned to do in partnership with the organization. It's a learning process, I think, for all of us. So phenomenal. And it's not rocket science.
Exactly. And when you mentioned, it's just such a practical and emotional or a human aspect that solved such an important problem and probably created a template for you, as a part of the checklist that any young adult, who is going through the program needs to express himself or herself with. And it does such a phenomenal, gives such a phenomenal kind of ability for them to perform.
That's correct. And it's a very tiny shift.
Exactly. But such a major shift, that's often the focus, in the real problem solving sometimes is, it's a simple solution, but we often, look at it from a very complex mind. And
that's correct.
One thing which I wanted to also understand from you, Shaloo, is what you shared with us is once the candidates or, the young adults are, already inducted inside as an intern or as an employee. But what I wanted to understand is what is the process from the interview process? When, somebody's, appearing for a job interview as opposed to a neurotypical, how is that process being shifted, transformed, oriented, from a corporate perspective to understand some of the challenges? Otherwise, they would never be able to evaluate correctly.
So, if we take a step back from the interview process, let's look at the onboarding.
Right.
The first change has to be on the onboarding and how do you select candidates. I honestly feel that a resume of somebody with neurodiversity will give you no idea of the skills of the person. And if you take a step back, where you're getting your resumes from is also a question we need to keep in mind, because a regular consultant or a regular, an employment or a job portal is not going to have these resumes. So most of these young people who are job ready, who have a diagnosis, are flying under the radar. You're going to miss them. You're going to miss them all because the skills that they have not been put onto paper. The parents or their special educators are thinking special educator. They're not even thinking about mainstream jobs. So they have not dressed up their resumes or have passed them on to people who are going to then give them to corporates. And most important is everybody is working in these small isolated pockets. Right. Phenomenal work being done by these small organizations. I have 3 resumes, you have 6, you have 12, we have 14. But are we all coming together? So the onboarding needs to be changed. There has to be a different assessment system to take these young people on board. Saying that sometimes you look at a resume and you think, this person is not even a graduate. And then you put aside that resume, not realizing that this person may be phenomenal at coding. He may not have been able to clear the traditional exam of coding. Or you may get a resume that reads beautifully, like a master's in big data, but he may not be able to work with any person outside of his immediate circle. Or he may not be able to work in an office at all.
Right.
Or he or she may not be able to take instructions from somebody. Or he or she may be absolutely averse to any kind of negative feedback.
Right.
Or maybe unable to just sit still and look at the camera for 10 seconds.
Right.
So there is a big disparity in the way onboarding is happening. And that's why you need to get in touch with consultants who know their job. Like we are just starting our second program called Learning Together 2.0 with Microsoft. We did one last year. Beginning of this year, we commenced. And then we are starting a new one now. They are only taking in students who have been through our employability program. So they are assured that when we hire somebody, we won't have to look at whether he or she is going to land up on time, whether he or she can communicate. They're only going to match now the skills to the business that they're taking the young person in. Yeah. So you need to
go. You're becoming like an extended HR and a training.
Yes.
Human.
Not very fond of that word, but yes.
From a corporate perspective,
an extended HR.
Still a term
from a corporate perspective. Or talent acquisition team.
Yeah. Talent acquisition. Tag, absolutely.
Yeah, the tag team. So there are a lot of fun words that I have learned, and I keep asking, what is this? What is this? What? And they just throw these words at you, and I realize we throw these words at our young people. They don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what, because it's not an environment I'm used to.
Right.
So our young people are also not used to this jargon being sent at them.
Right.
So it's simple things like, the ask is, and they don't know, like ask is asking a question. How can ask be a noun?
Right.
And not a verb. So, those are the little things that they miss out on. So the onboarding has to be different. You have to have a much bigger personality or an attitude resume. Very comprehensive, exhaustive. You really need to know as much as it is required, but not too much. It's a paradox. I'm not going to overly let you know things about my student. You don't need to. I'll let you know things that are essential for him or her to work. So it's a balance that we walk with every candidate that we refer to.
Phenomenal. And I see that there is a much wider need of pan-India for the services that you're providing, to connect with the various organizations, not only at a larger corporate level, but at every tier of employability. And which is very, very important. And I hope this message is, what you say is heard by many more, and that inspires someone to, connect with Evoluer and probably take a leaf out of your book and initiate similar kind of activity in other cities in India. And I think this is so lacking, and this is so needed and required. So well done to you and your team for a very differentiated thinking of a very important talent pool that could benefit, and where the corporates could take so much of advantage, from them.
Yes.
The next question which I have, Shaloo, is, from a corporate perspective, it is always profits and loss, and a question that someone who is far-fetched, who doesn't even understand what neurodiversity is, what people with autism go through, and the spectrum is very wide. It's not, you cannot paint with the same brush everyone in there. And someone says why would I employ someone from the autism spectrum? What benefit would I have? And I'm asking the question so that the answer motivates rather than being difficult here.
If you're a business person, you will have to think from a business point of view. You will hire a person with autism for the same reason why you would hire anybody. That's the bottom line.
Right.
If you're going to approach the hiring of somebody with neurodiversity with this, leave aside sympathy. Sympathy is out. Sympathy is a negative emotion. Okay, and I'll digress a bit and explain why sympathy doesn't work.
Please.
Because sympathy makes you feel really shitty about yourself. So you can't sustain anything that you begin with sympathy in mind. It's not a positive emotion to have. So yes, you have to have the empathy, but you have to have the business sense in mind. That's why I'm never in favor of people hiring young people and not paying them. Because the minute you start paying them, you start thinking differently. It has to make business sense. Otherwise, you will not be able to sustain it. Right. That is going to be the first reason why you hire somebody with any neurodiversity, autism, learning disability, intellectual disability, or whatever you want to call it. I'm using these terms because these are the terms that are familiar to most people. Yeah. So just saying somebody whose needs are a little different than ours is very vague. We are talking about people with a diagnosis, and in all our government documents and all our certification, it still reads intellectual disability. So I'm going to use that term so that people can understand who we are talking about here.
Right.
That's the first reason why you will hire somebody with neurodiversity. You will hire somebody with neurodiversity for the same reason why women started showing up at workplaces hundreds of years ago. Yeah, because it's the thing to do. Inclusivity means hiring everybody.
Right.
And just like you made the toilets accessible for women, you're going to make your workplace accessible for people with a diagnosis. It's as simple as that. Right. The second reason is for the opportunity of learning. We are going to learn about ourselves. We are going to learn about human beings. We are going to learn about individual potential. We are going to learn about what every individual is capable of doing. Organizations like Microsoft or anybody else, if you're not a production house, you are successful because of the kind of people you hire.
Right.
So you're working with people. So why not include all kinds of people just for the opportunity of growing as human beings ourselves? That should be the second reason why you need to hire people with neurodiversity.
Right.
And the third reason that you're going to hire people with neurodiversity is because it's the thing to do. There is no other way. Like now we are thinking, oh my God, 200 years back, women didn't work. It's a strange, idea to wrap our heads around. And I feel that's how it's going to be a few hundred years from now. That एक time था हम लोग diagnosis वाले लोगों को लेते नहीं थे. I think we are getting towards that. Slowly we are demystifying. Slowly we are closing the gap. And we are really understanding what adaptations are all about. It's beyond braille. It's beyond ramps. It is a mindset. It's keeping in mind always that the deliverable is not going to change. We are not going to dilute what the young person is going to deliver at the end of the day. Our instructions are going to change. We'll stretch the time out. We will repeat things. We'll listen more. We'll be a little bit more patient, which are the things we should be doing as humans anyway.
Sure.
And we are not going to dilute what the students are going to, or the young people or the interns are going to deliver. And we are going to be ready to shift and change things that we need to. So, Evoluer also has a sister concern called ECOS. It's called Evoluer's Contemporary Office Services. Mm-hmm. And we have ourselves hired some of our young people, 6 people to be exact at this point of time, who we are paying, and they do all our back office operations, back end work for us. No. And we've realized that if we cannot put our sensibilities to work, then we cannot expect a third party to do it. So we started with that first, that can our young people make all our worksheets for us? Can they organize office space for us? Are they able to manage my accounts? Are they able to do data entry? Can they do all my sample papers for open school for me? Yes, they are able to. Can they show up on time? Am I able to derive enough work from them to be able to pay them? And yes, since we are able to do it, I'm fairly confident anybody else should be able to do it as well.
Phenomenal. Very powerful. Very powerful. Shaloo, one thing which I was following Evoluer on Facebook, that especially as the pandemic started, there were a number of online sessions on various topics that you and your team conducted. What's your view on online as a tool for neurodiverse adults?
So like I keep saying again and again, the possibilities of online learning, teaching is the same as it is for anybody else.
Right.
I think the pandemic and the lockdown was a wake-up call for a lot of organizations about, are we teaching them the relevant global skills? ऐसा तो नहीं है कि दुनिया प्लेन पे और हम बैलगाड़ी पर घूम रहे हैं. The comfort of tried and tested skills is so much that we are not ready to believe that we can teach them something else. And I'll give you a small example. The lockdown began on the 25th of March, but we were given the advisory by the Haryana government on the 17th of March that shut schools. We got the advisory on the 17th, and by 18th, we had gone 100% online.
Wow.
Without a blink. It's like makhan ki tarah. That's because the students who were already coming to us, and we had 40 at that point of time, they were already learning on the computer. Regardless of their IQ, their diagnosis, their ability, their disability, or anything, everybody knew that this screen is a teaching medium. This screen is an input-output device. And parents used to tell me, "Arey, आप diary नहीं भेजते, अब copy कहाँ है बच्चों की?" And we used to tell them, "Copy नहीं है, please open the computer, उसमें folder है." टाइम टेबल नहीं भेजा आपने. I said, वो टाइम टेबल उसके आउटलुक कैलेंडर में है. We had already moved them onto the skills that are global skills. We are looking at global citizens. They come from backgrounds where their whole family, their cousins, their peer group, their schoolmates, their brothers, sisters, they all travel. They all come from a background where they are seeing all these things on the computer. They all want to Google. They all want to be able to type for songs. They all want to shop online. So they already were doing programs that made them very comfortable with this. Then we were really lucky. We have another branch in Mumbai. So we already had these Zoom interactive sessions with the Mumbai group. So they already knew, अरे Zoom है, mute करना है, ऐसे वैसे नहीं करेंगे, सब सीधे बैठेंगे, unmute yourself, mute yourself, ask a question, put it on the chat, set a reminder. So they were already on that phase, and so very beautifully we just moved on to online learning. And I think I was getting more used to the online learning. We started with 40, we had 120.
Wow.
From all over India. We had people from outside India. We had Dubai, we had Sharjah, we had teachers from the US. We had teachers from Australia, we had people from Japan, and the kind of knowledge that was built. Like, all my students understand what Pacific time is and what Eastern time is and what London time is. They understand, abhi wahan raat hai, yahan pe din hai. Oh, this Christmas there, we can see the tree behind you. All those things have been so powerful. And technology, I tell you, Subhadip, has been our best friend. We have all picked up, if you see my class, it's a delight for any techie. And I'm not a technical person. I have my speaker, I have my mic, I have my iPad. I'm joining in from 2-3 devices. My staff has a green screen. They have that mic. We are doing physical activity. We are doing dances, and we are doing virtual tours of the Louvre. We've been to the Met online. We have traveled. We've done helicopter rounds of the Himalayas. It's been phenomenal how our students have taken up to online. And I think it's time that the other organizations that work in this sector have stepped out of the realm of art and crafts and doing handicrafts to a more digital world. And I hope that their teachers have woken up to the fact that we need to learn this. It's no getting away from. It's here to stay. This is the only future that I see which is predictable.
you have to adapt to it, and
They have
that's
to. They have to.
100%. Shaloo, we're almost towards the end of the show. I've got one last question, and what advice would you give to parents who, of having children who in the intellectual disability in a zone? I mean, sometimes I feel like they are too protective towards them.
Now, this what I'm saying is, of course, my opinion.
Sure.
It is what my experience has been like. They have to do the fine balance between being realistic and being optimistic. You have to be realistic about the skills that you can see in your son or daughter. But you also have to keep in mind that if you have not given that young person the opportunity to actualize the potential, then don't claim that वो ये कर सकता है या नहीं कर सकती. So if you look at me and I give my example that if you look at me now and say that Shaloo will never ever be able to run a marathon, that sounds sensible. But if you tell me now, actually let me go back 20 years. If you told me 20 years ago that Shaloo would never ever be able to run a marathon, most people will nod their heads. But if somebody at that point had told me that Shaloo can't run a marathon now, but I'm fairly certain if I get a good trainer and if she's willing to put in the next 10 years of training, after 10 years of daily training for 6 hours, she would be able to run a marathon. Right. These are two different things. Okay? And I would say, I agree to that. On the other hand, if somebody tells me now that Shaloo is going to gain 1 foot in height and the waist is going to become 22, that's not going to happen. So you need to be realistic and you need to keep in mind that given the right training, potential, input, learning, teaching with the right teacher, there are many things that you can attain. But there are some things that you'll not be able to attain. If you are a person with autism, you're going to remain a person with autism all your life. Yeah, you would learn to cope up. You will learn skills. You will fit in. You will be happy, productive, earn money, have a girlfriend, marry, travel, and do everything else a person without autism has been able to do. But the diagnosis will remain. It is not something to be cured. I am who I am. I don't want to change into a person from Japan. I cannot. Right? I was going to say a man, but yes, now you can do that as well. But I cannot change who I am, but it doesn't matter. I can do anything what a Japanese can. I can cook sushi. I can learn the language. I can stay in Tokyo. I can become as organized and precise as they are. There's nothing to stop me. And I can shift there. I may not look like a person from Japan, but I'll do everything else. So they have to be realistic. Then they have to believe that there are other organizations and people and trainers who are there to help you and guide you. And they have to remember, parents, that they are parents. Don't try to always be a therapist, because therapists to bahut mil jayenge. Parent aap hi ho. So don't try and do everything with a therapeutic goal. Trust your instincts. Just go along with the flow of somebody who has a diagnosis. It's a different world. It's beautiful. Just go along with the flow and it'll be easier. Don't try to swim upstream all the time, and be accepting towards, of course, your son or daughter, but be tolerant towards the rest of the society also. I know you have to be an advocate and you have to be out there, but be tolerant, because it is those organizations who are learning yet who are going to end up being the greatest allies to your son or daughter in the future. So do the fine balance and find the right people and do the right things at the right time.